Hello, YouTube. Hope everybody's doing well. It's May the 5th, and here we are back for another edition of the Stratosphere Studio. Hurrah! Hurrah! I hope everybody's been well. I have been a little busy out of town, as some of you may know. I say 5th of May, it's the 6th of May. How about that? Got my Gator shirt on tonight because my right angle that I'll be posting immediately after the show is about the University of Florida, which released the most remarkable letter. I'll give you a little cheat here. I'll read it for you. This is what the University of Florida had to say about college demonstrations. Imagine. I'm so proud. This was sent out, about 4 or 5 days ago. This is a memo from the University of Florida to students and faculty. It's very simple. It says, University of Florida allowable activities. Speech, that's good, that's a First Amendment right. Expressing viewpoints, also a First Amendment right. Holding signs in hands, also a First Amendment right. Prohibitive items and activities. No amplified sound, no demonstrations inside buildings, no littering, no sleeping, no unmanned signs, no blocking ingress or egress, no building of structures, meaning chairs, stakes, benches, and tables, no camping, including tents, sleeping bags, pillows, etc., no disruption, no threats, no violence, no weapons, and any other items and or activities deemed to be non-compliant with policy and regulations by university officials. That's what you're saying. That's what they're saying that you can and cannot do. And then I hope everybody's sitting down, because here we go. Consequences for non-compliance. Listen carefully, Columbia. Individuals found responsible for engaging in prohibitive activities shall be trespassed from campus. Students will receive a 3-year trespass and suspension. Employees will be trespassed and separated from employment. Separated from employment. That's just makes me proud to be a Florida Gator. It's just amazing how wonderful life can be if people are told to behave, and then if they don't behave, then there are consequences. So I was just as happy as can be. I have no doubt that the presence of Ron DeSantis has something to do with that, but nevertheless, I mean, Florida's not immune from all of this garbage, but it was nice to see somebody actually say consequences for noncompliance. You can go ahead and violate any of these rules. That's fine. You're out of here. You had a 3-year suspension. Go be a jerk someplace else. Florida State, probably. But in any event, it was really, really cool. So I was happy about that. I guess, hang on, let me just get a water here. That's all the way over here. Hang on a second. So, on the Facebook page, I said, let's have ourselves a lighthearted little discussion about life and death, which I'm kind of in the mood to do. This is our storytelling night, Monday. But I have to tell you, when it comes to storytelling, this is the ending is it's a big part of the story. Hang on one second here. From Astronerd, Doug Higgins' Questar telescope has come up for sale. I immediately thought of you. It has all of the original pavework plus data on all the prior owners. Comes with a tripod and glass solar filter and other items. They want $4,000. The package is worth $4 to $7. You could send Phil down to look at it if you're interested. Let me know. Thank you, Astronerd. Believe it or not, my wife got me a 6-inch reflector, a 3-inch reflector telescope for my birthday. So that was nice. The optics aren't, I wouldn't describe them as spectacular, but in any event, it was a very lovely gift. So I'm loaded up as far as telescopes are concerned. For those of you who haven't been keeping up with current events, I was away for Thursday's Stratosphere Lounge show because, as I posted on my Facebook page, my friend Dick Rattan was feeling poorly. what I knew, but what I didn't particularly care to announce on Facebook was that it was like, so can I get up there like Monday or something? And it's like, if you're coming, you better come like tonight. So I got up there on Thursday night. Let me make sure about these dates here. I don't want to be misquoted. Yeah, that sounds right. I got up there on the late flight on Thursday night. I got picked up, and then on Friday we spent May 3rd, most of the morning of May 3rd, waiting to hear from Dick's wife to see if it was a good time to go over. So we went in there, and I had heard prior to me going that that there was, if you'll pardon the expression, a deadline here, and that the thank you very much for all the condolences, rather, and that the deadline was not, they're frantically trying to save him. Dick had determined he just didn't want to live like that. To give you an idea of the kind of state his lungs were in, a patient who's on oxygen, which is not uncommon at all, might see a flow of maybe 3.5, 4 liters per minute of oxygen. Dick Rutan was on 35 liters of oxygen. And it's in the nature of Dick Rutan to, every time somebody would come and visit, he'd say, "Want to see something?" He had the nasal cannula in there. And we'd say, "Sure." And he'd take it out for a second, and he'd hold it right here, and it'd blow his hair up. That's how much oxygen was coming out of that thing. It was just astonishing, the flow. So Dick had decided he didn't want to live that way, and he decided he was going to disconnect the oxygen. He was going to do it on Saturday, but I got there on Thursday night, and when we saw him on Friday morning, he had said that Thursday night was unbearable. He woke up 6 times, feeling like he was, drowning, couldn't breathe. It was essentially like he was being waterboarded 6, 7 times in one night. And he just said, "I'm not going through that again." And we said, "Okay, Killer, you're the man." And so we sat in there, and I talked to him for a little over an hour, I guess. With Bert was there, and my friend Brent Regan, and another friend of mine, Dan, and Tanya Rutan, Bert's wife. And we sat there and talked with him. Now, when I went up there, I had a specific mission, and that was to make his final days miserable as possible. And by that I mean as hilarious as possible. That was my entire goal going up there, and I'm proud to say that I succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. Dick was laughing pretty much the entire time, and sometimes was laughing so hard it was really causing trouble breathing. So I would kind of like to talk about that, because I never, during the entire time I was in the room, when I heard the news that he'd finally passed away, during the flight back, during the flight up, I'd never felt a particle of sadness about this. I feel I miss him, but the experience was so overwhelmingly positive. If that's a word you can believe, that's the word that came to mind. That I wanted to talk about this whole thing, and the reason it felt so positive and why I felt so at ease about the whole thing was just the nature of it, and I think that might be his greatest legacy, despite all the aviation records that he's set. He was one of the great blessings of this, and you don't often get this lucky. I certainly didn't get this lucky. with my mom. I didn't get a chance to say goodbye to my dad or my mom. My dad had a very, as they would say back in the olden days, he had a very good death. He was going on a fishing expedition in Canada. He was walking up a trail, and he was just, when my dad gets excited, and like going fishing or something, he becomes like a 12-year-old kid. He just starts bouncing around. And he was talking about how they're going to take every single fish out of that lake and so on. And he's walking up this trail right behind his younger brother, my Uncle Jack. And he said, "Hang on a second, Jack, I feel a little dizzy." Just kind of sat down on the grass there, leaned back, closed his eyes, and gone. Which is awfully good. Doing doing what you love most in the world, it's a pretty good way to go. Intertwined with this whole strange story that we're going to talk about tonight, this topic, I think I have to keep weaving my own personal experiences into this. Like most people, when I was younger, I was, just completely terrified of dying. I wasn't, when you're a young man, you're invincible. I never thought about it. I never really, gave some trouble. But there were a couple times in my life where I had some medical symptoms that worried me a lot. And I thought, oh my God, and then I've told many times I had this flight in a glider where it was sunset and I was above one cloud layer and below another in these shafts of golden light. And I remember coming out of that glider thinking, while I was in the airplane still actually, thinking, you know what, I got to see this, I got to do this. I'm in a flying bathtub with no engine. I'm at, 11,000 feet and climbing. And that's good enough. That was, I feel like I could depart in peace. Have many, many moments like that since then. And for which I'm very, very grateful. But I guess over time, I've given this a lot of thought, and it seems like it'd be a good time to talk about this particular subject, both in a storytelling form and also, you could don't worry about deleting questions. I'll get to all of those. Not only in storytelling form for the Stratosphere Studio, but just as a message of hope for people. So this is just going to be a mashup of ideas and experiences and things that I went through in the last couple days, and in fact, the last several years. It's hard to talk. One of the problems with our society, and I think one of the reasons why this subject is so hard on people and so stressful, is because we, as a society, have removed dying from just removed it. It doesn't exist there anymore. Even in my dad's generation, certainly. Dad was born in 25, and further back you go, the more common this was. People would die at home, and they'd be surrounded by their loved ones, and by the time you got to be, 12 or 13 or 14, you'd probably seen a number of your relatives, die in the house. And that doesn't exist anymore. And usually what happens is they get carted away to a hospital, and the next thing you know, you're standing in a church service, and there's a picture, and you don't see it. You're not there for the last moment. Now, in Dick's case, I wasn't there for the last moment either. That privilege was reserved certainly to his wife, Chris, his wife of 25 years. Those were the only two people in the room when he decided to take the oxygen off. But I did see him shortly before then, and I can tell you, I want to tell you a little bit about that. Dick went out the way he lived his life, which is courageously, and I personally believe that kind of courage can be taught, and that it's a learned skill set. So that's my premise as we go through this little story time tonight. The reason I said I went up there to make him laugh was because, in a strange sort of way, it kind of connected us in this. And what I mean by that, and I was the only person doing this, and I'm not the first time I've done this, but I was the only person who was there to make him laugh. And the reason I did that was because it ties a line. It's like a lifeline that's thrown out from the living to the dying, and it basically says this whole thing is not only going to be okay, and it's not anything to fear. It's here we are. Why don't we just have a laugh at it, because it's either laugh or cry. And so I, from the beginning, just kept going at it, at the fact that he was dying that day, because I'll tell you what just flew into my head. I have a similar feeling about it as I did when I first met Mike Schmidt, who was a horribly wounded soldier that I got to know when I was doing fundraisers for Veterans Airlift Command, which uses private airplanes to fly wounded soldiers anywhere, anytime, without any background checks or anything. If you've been injured, wounded in Vietnam, although that too, I guess, guys would come back from Iraq without a leg or an arm or both, and pilots would just sign up for this, and they would take them and their family to Disneyland in a G4, in a business jet. It's a really excellent charity. And when I first interviewed Mike, it was on board a private jet, and I was this close to him, and Mike had been so badly injured by an IED. He basically was riding in the Humvee. He originally was in the up armored truck, but he had some new guys there, and he didn't want them out in the Humvee, so he took the Humvee. And on the way back, they went over an IED, which were 222 millimeter howitzer shells that were fused and had liquid propane. So Mike's just driving along. The next thing you know, he's flying through the air, and then he's, seriously, something like 60 yards away from his burning Humvee. The guys in the Hummer look like they're dead. Mike gets up, like any Ranger sergeant, starts running forward to help his men, and as he's running forward, he realizes he's on fire, and because he's soaked in this liquid propane. So ran as far as he could, then he went down to the ground. His buddies, helped put out the fire. His skin was coming off, that kind of thing. And when I finally got a chance to meet him, his face his head looked like a bowling ball made out of scar tissue. And most disturbing was the fact that his nose was gone, which means there's just two open sinus cavities. And that's a freaking horrifying thing to see, to be perfectly honest with you. His eyelids had been burned off, and his lips were, largely gone. And I remember so clearly, when I got on that plane, I remember so clearly saying to myself, the most important thing that I do in there, the most important thing is that I look him in the eyes and don't look away. Just face it. Now, Mike Schmidt had the same qualities that Dick Rutan did. Does have the same qualities that Dick Rutan did. Lady Jen wants to know what we're talking about. Talking about my friend Dick Rutan, who died over the weekend, and I'm talking about acquired courage. Now, I think everybody can basically get that. So Mike would joke about things. He'd joke about going down for a palm reading, and he didn't have any hands. He had a couple of hooks. When he finally had a number of reconstructive surgeries, I saw him at a restaurant, and I came in. He was facing away from me, and I didn't. Oh, that's quite all right. Thank you. It was a lovely experience. Mike was facing away from me, and I didn't recognize him until I finally came around the table. And by that point, he'd had an additional 7 or 8 surgeries. I want to say he had something like 30. But they had built a basic nose for him, and his ears had been burned off. But this time, I couldn't recognize him from behind because he had his ears. And I went up to him and I said, "Mike, how you doing?" He said, "Good." I said, "They're making some real progress here." He said, "Yeah." And I said, "Why is it though, Mike? You got your prosthetic ears. That's great, but why did you choose 4-year-old girls' ears?" He said, "What?" I said, "They're like mouse ears. They got the tiniest ears I've ever seen." He said, "Well, if you go around without ears for 3 or 4 years, when you try them on, you can't believe how shocking they are, how prominent they look. I tried on, so I'm just ribbing him. I'm just giving him grief, because Mike is a ranger. He's an ass-kicking guy. He doesn't want sympathy. He wants to make light of it. He wants it to be out in the open and so on. So that was the same feeling I had with Dick, and that was, I'm not going to dance around this thing, and I'm not going to. I'm going to poke him, and I'm going to keep poking him, because poking him is my way of saying it's going to be cool. It's going to be all right. And it ain't no thing. So I walk in there with a group of people, and we're all standing around the bed, and Dick salutes everybody, and we kind of salute back. And I said, "Hey, Dick," and I got to tell you, you just look like absolute shit, man. You look terrible. And he laughed. He actually looked great, and Dick was sharp as a tack. I mean, just mentally just sharp as a tack. And it just kind of went on from there. Just a couple of the ones I remember, he said, "Good to see you, Bill." And I said, "Yeah, well, it was a hell of a time getting up here, Dick. They canceled half the flights on the West Coast because somebody's hogging all the oxygen. And, they can't even get the planes fueled up because somebody in the Northwest is hogging all the oxygen. No idea where it's going." He kind of grinned at that. He had sent to my friend Brent. I had ridden around with Dick. Last time I saw Dick, we'd ridden around in his Razor. It's a 4-wheel drive off-road vehicle. He let me drive it for an hour up and down a mountain. And so we come in there, and pretty early on, he says to Brent, "So Brent, my Razor, it's in the hangar. I want you to have it. It's yours. Keys are in it." And Brent said, "Oh, Dick, thank you. That's really, really nice of you." And I said, "It's not only nice of you, Dick, it's a hell of a coincidence. I mean, on the way over here, Brent was that's all he could talk about. He said, I hope he gives me the Razor. I hope he gives me the Razor. I hope I get the Razor. All I want is a Razor." I said, "Lighten up about the Razor, for God's sakes, Brent." He said, "That's the only reason I'm going to the damn hospital, Bill. I really, 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 really want that Razor. I want it real bad." And that made him laugh. And the only time he got emotional, and I know, see, this is the thing, I know these kind of people. I'd like to be one of them. I try to be one of them. They don't want to break down. It's embarrassing to them. And he was talking, and the only time I saw him get really emotional was when he's saying, "I'm not worried about this. I think it's a big adventure, and I'm going to see we're going to find out soon enough." And then he said, "But I do really worry about the impact it's going to have on Chris. Chris is his wife." And he started to get a little choked up then, and I just leapt in there, and I said, "Well, Dick, if you want to, I mean, we're friends. If you want to, tomorrow morning I can check and see if she's, registered on Match.com or something for you." And he looked at me for a second, and then he just started laughing. And then for the rest of the visit, he would just look over at me with this twinkle in his eye, like, you devil. He just kept laughing about it. So I just came out of there feeling. I'm not going to lie to you. I came out of that room feeling kind of, good. I wasn't happy about not seeing Dick anymore. That didn't make me happy, but I felt really good that this brave man was able to go on his own terms, and I wanted him to know that steely-eyed missile men were with him on this. That it was completely cool. Now, he was on so much oxygen that we were convinced that once he took the oxygen off, he'd be unconscious within 10 seconds and gone within 60. But what we found out later was he unhooked the oxygen and he lasted for 3 hours, which sounds horrible, except for the fact that the prior to taking the oxygen off, it had really started to hurt. His lungs had just been destroyed. Prior to taking the oxygen off, he'd been given a fair amount of morphine, and the hospital, obviously, we don't do euthanasia in this country, which I approve of, frankly. But they had given him enough morphine to take away what one of the nurses says, he's not going to have any air hunger. So there was none of that gasping, none of that, that kind of nightmare horror. But he reached up and did it himself. He said, it's time to go, and he went. He didn't want to go through another night like the night he had, and he didn't want to go through life like that. So he didn't. He was a tough old bird. That's exactly what we said. He's just a tough guy. That's how I remember him. That's how I'm always going to remember him. I'm going to remember him with that little crinkle in his eye, like, I can't believe you said that, you son of a bitch. It was the most hilarious thing I've ever heard. And so this kind of gets into something that's a little more personal and a little more metaphysical, but this is what I've come to believe because of science. I spent the first 2/3 or maybe even 3/4 of my life as sort of a material atheist. I had everything all figured out, just like Richard Dawson and Carl Sagan and the rest of these guys. And I believed, and they may be right. I mean, they certainly may be right. But I had believed for the longest time that that this whole afterlife thing was just a way to to mitigate fear. And along with that worldview came that kind of arrogance about well, I'm intellectually tough enough to face the fact that that's it. Well, it's lights out, you're gone, and so on. And I believed that for the longest time. I had a experience with a little bird named Howie that changed my opinion quite a lot, but I'll come back to him. What changed my mind about this was a couple of things. First of all, this idea that we've got it all figured out, that we know everything, and that there is nothing beyond our knowing, and if there's something we don't know yet, we'll know it soon. That kind of arrogance has been beaten out of me. It seems pretty clear experimentally. I'm going with the actual science on this, but there's a fairly good amount of evidence, mathematical evidence, physical evidence, that this is in fact an 11-dimensional universe, and we live in a 4-dimensional universe. As I pointed out before, not everybody really appreciates this, but if you take this coffee cup, this coffee mug has 4 dimensions. It's got height, it's got depth, it's got width, but it also has duration. It's got duration. It is moving through time along with all the rest of us. If you've ever heard of Flatland, this idea that there are 2-dimensional creatures, you can look down on them and watch them go around each other. You can see inside them, and they go inside a building. It's just a line, but they disappear to other Flatlanders. You're looking straight down on them, see them the whole time. You look down on the Flatlanders, and you realize how simple their life is. But the most important thing about Flatlanders is they can't tell you're watching. They have 2-dimensional vision. They can see left and right, forward and backward, but they can't see up. They can only see the plane of the paper that they're in, and even paper has thickness. This doesn't have any thickness at all. And I thought, well, if we can imagine Flatlanders and looking down on Flatlanders and how limited their perception is with being 2-dimensional creatures instead of 3-dimensional creatures, then it makes me wonder about 11-dimensional creatures and 5th-dimensional creatures, 7th-dimensional creatures, and what kind of perceptions they're able to make. A 4-dimensional creature moving through time as a 5th dimension, if there was another dimension that was at right angles to X, Y, and Z, which is impossible for us to imagine because it extends off into a dimension that we can't look that way, but we can Imagine it. So a physically four-dimensional creature looking at us can see our insides and our outsides at the same time. They can see the inside of the building and the outside of a building at the same time. They can see our insides and our outsides at the same time, in the same way that if we look down on a flatlander, which is essentially a cell, we can see the outside of the cell, we can see the inside of the cell. So this idea that because we've managed to master a few things in four dimensions, and that we've got it all figured out, and there's no creator, and there's no God, and there's nobody, there's no higher power, there's no nothing, started to sound a little bit too arrogant for me, at least to the degree that it opened the door to open my mind. But what really, really, really did it for me was this. Quantum did it for me. It is proven experimentally more times than you can count. Our cell phones don't work unless this is true. But basically, the shortest form of this is that we do not exist independent of the universe, because the universe changes when we observe it. There's an experiment where you can pass light through a series of slits, and if you're watching it, it behaves like a particle. If you're not watching it, it behaves like a wave, or vice versa. I forget which. But again and again, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle says you can know the position of the particle, or you can know the speed of the particle, but you can't know both. You can't pin it down. One excludes the other. That was the first kind of glimpse of the quantum world. Things like quantum entanglement, where two atoms could be separated by the width of the universe, and if you entangle them, what you do to one causes the other one to do the opposite, this kind of thing. But the main thing is the observing. More and more, real fundamental physicists are saying time is a real problem. They're saying that time doesn't behave the way we think it behaves experimentally or mathematically, and they also have suggested that in many cases it certainly appears that particles don't even exist unless we go looking for them, that the universe essentially has to respond to the observer. And there's so much evidence for this that I've come to believe it. Now, if you haven't seen all that evidence, it sounds frankly pretty nutty, but a lot of things sound kind of nutty on the quantum level. But I'm convinced that basically the universe's complexity is predicated on the sophistication of the person or people observing it. And this seems to be borne out experimentally, that on some level, that old saw, if a tree falls in a forest, does it make a sound, is actually closer to if a tree falls in a forest and no one observes it, is the tree even there? This is extremely counterintuitive, and a lot of people think, well, that's just mumbo jumbo. But when you get down to the actual math of it and the actual experimental world, this is what you're beginning to see, that observation affects reality, and the more intricately we observe reality, the more complex reality becomes. And then I realized, well, here we sit in 3 dimensions, and I've got this, cantaloupe-sized lump of jelly in my head, and this allows me to have enough consciousness to observe things. But am I the most sophisticated consciousness that I can imagine? I'm not the most sophisticated consciousness in the room, usually. So if all of this experimental stuff ends up proving out to be true, then really what you're saying is that everything that is that way because it's being observed. It's being observed and interacted. And if watching something physically changes the physical state of the universe, this is not up for discussion. This is absolutely proven experimentally. If you look at something and you do an experiment to observe something, you change the outcome. And that led me to believe, well, then, and all you really need is, if you had an extremely, extremely sophisticated observer, you would be able to think the universe into existence. And that's not a stretch. If it turned out that there was no connection between observation and physical reality, then this whole philosophy and theory would fall apart. But that's a solid piece of experimentally proven evidence that observing something changes something. So I'm prepared to admit that there might be a greater mind than mine out there someplace. And if in 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th dimensions. And so it becomes a relatively simple thing to think that flatland looks so simple because it's only two-dimensional. How simple does the three-dimensional world look to an 11th-dimensional creature? And if an 11th-dimensional creature, if a fourth-dimensional creature can see our insides and our outsides, observe both of those at the same time, we know these dimensions exist. So what happens to an 11th-dimensional observer who looks at the universe? You're very, very quickly getting to the point where what that observer thinks about becomes real. I've come to believe this. So I didn't go into all that detail with Dick, but I'll tell you what I did tell Dick. I said, Dick, I have a term that I think I've coined. I've never heard it anywhere else. But we have only so many neural connections in our brains. So there are things that we can comprehend, and we do miracles with this monkey brain, miracles. But ultimately, there are things that we cannot comprehend. We can deal with the symbols of them, and we can manipulate concepts, but the map is not the territory. If I show you a map of Texas and you look at this, you say, I say, what's this? You say, it's Texas. It's like, no, this isn't Texas. Texas is huge, and it's composed of not only billions of little millions, trillions, quadrillions of little pieces of sand and scorpions and rocks and air and all the rest of the stuff. It's also, all the atoms involved. No, this is not Texas. This is just an outline of Texas. Helps us move around Texas, but the map is not the territory. So I said to him, my personal belief based on the science that I've read is that we have a horsepower limitation and a perception limitation when it comes to time. Just before I went up there, by happy coincidence, I saw a really interesting, very interesting and relatively short talk by a philosopher who was really superb, very gentle and very quiet. And a very young girl off camera asked him, what happens to time? Why does time go away when we're sleeping? He said, that's a profoundly good question. He said, so let's talk about this. He said, we think of time as a distance between either something that happened in the past and something that's going to happen in the future, or between two things that happened in the past, or conceivably that two things that might happen in the future. We measure the distance between these two things, and we call that distance time. He said, we tend to think of time as an infinite future that extends infinitely in front of us, an infinite past that extends infinitely behind us, and a now which is so fleeting that it never really exists. So he said, let's look at this from an experimental point of view. If we can't experience something, if we can't touch it or bounce echoes off of it or something, then how do we know it exists? So he said to this girl, he said, as an experiment, what I'd like you to do now is go back 5 minutes into the past when you first asked the question. He said, I don't want you to imagine that you're going back into the past, because that's something you're doing in the present. You're pretending to go in the past. I want you to step out of the present and go back to the past and just stay there for a minute. And she said, that's impossible. He said, right, that is impossible. And it's impossible to do for the future, too. The past doesn't exist. The future doesn't exist. They seem to be gone. And all there is a now. So then he asked her, how many nows do you think you experience in your life? And she said, it's impossible to answer that question. He said, right again. Essentially, you just experience one now. But that now moves through what we call time. He went on to say that that time is how we look at the world in the same way that a skier might put on yellow snow goggles. And if you've ever worn yellow snow goggles skiing, you realize that relatively quickly, the landscape stops looking yellow. Your brain just adapts, and essentially your brain tells you that yes, snow is yellow. It's supposed to be yellow. The sky is kind of a greenish blue. You don't see the yellow after a while. You just go skiing. He said we do the same thing. Our consciousness does the same thing with regard to time. We wear time goggles that allows us to deal with this motion through a dimension that we can't see, and it works well for us in terms of our day-to-day existence and keeping us sane and making sure we don't all end up at the same party at the same time and all the rest of it. But he basically said, if you think about it, the fact that the past doesn't exist and the future doesn't exist where we are right now doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Where did the past go? Where is the future coming from? So I have come to believe that consciousness is so mysterious. I've talked about this many times with AI, but essentially what I believe is that consciousness is what allows us to experience this world and make sense out of it, but we can only do that one frame at a time. That we're not capable of perceiving the past and the future because they are a fourth dimension that we can't see. Like the Flatlanders can't see up into the third dimension, we can't see out into the fourth dimension. And if we could see into the fourth dimension, we would be able to see like a kind of a worm-like shape, which would be all of my motions for the rest of my life, extending forward into the back, into the future. And if I look behind me, I'd be able to see the front of my face and all of the positions I've ever been in my entire life, extending all the way back into the past, if I could see in that fourth dimension. So, this has led me to believe that this horsepower limitation is with us all the time, and we're always thinking about before and after, and it's almost impossible for us not to. But stay with me on this, because I've given this a fair amount of thought. I told Dick this. I said, Dick, here's what I believe about life and death. I believe that everything that you do in your life during the course of your life is built into the universe, that it is part of this 11-dimensional structure. And it's always been there, and it always will be there. It's a little piece of an infinitely complex thing that's there. And people will say, well, then there's no such thing as free will. It's like, no. Free will is built into the shape of the structure that you carve onto the universe. Well, how is that possible if things always been there and always will be there? Now we're at the horsepower limit. You made free will decisions that altered your physical course through the fourth dimension, and that four-dimensional worm of your existence is the result of free will choices that you make in the now. Because the past doesn't exist, the future doesn't exist, but the now is always the now. And this thing is the now. So I said, what it comes down to is the best example I can think of, best example I've ever heard. I didn't come up with this, but I think it's really good, is that if you take for those of you old enough to remember, an LP, everybody, even the youngest people watching this, know what an LP is. You know what a record player used to look like, even if you've never seen one or used one. I believe that from our perspective, our lives start when you put the needle down on the beginning, on the outside of the record, and then the record plays, and you hear the first song, and that's your childhood, and your second song, your third song, and it just goes all the way around, and you finally get to the last song, and at the very, very end of the last song, the needle reaches the end of the record, and we look at that as a line, because that's what it is. If you take an LP and you take that groove that the needle follows, that could be easily stretched out into a line. It's convenient to put it into a spiral, but if the needle moved along a straight line, that's how we perceive time, because we're the needle. We're the needle, and we're moving through those grooves. We can't change from one groove to another. We can't see that there are other grooves. As far as we're concerned, it's linear, but it's not linear. It's all impressed on one time, on one place. So if I were to basically say to you, hold up an LP here and say, which part of this LP is real? You'd say, well, all of it's real. You'd be right. if I hold up an LP, a Frank Sinatra LP, Frank Sinatra's greatest hits, then all the songs are on there and they don't go away. They never go away. Let's just assume for the sake of it that Frank Sinatra LP is Frank Sinatra's life, and it's been there forever and it'll always be there forever. So what part of Frank Sinatra's life is real? Well, it's all real. If you're the needle, if you're Frank Sinatra and you're the needle, it's just one line that has a beginning and an end, because you can't move the needle. But once you die, you're free of being the needle. You're free of the needle. The consciousness is the observation, which I think has an excellent chance of surviving. And I also think that whoever pressed that record has an interest in us as records, right? That's why the thing was built, was to see what kind of music was going to come out of this thing. And so I said, that's what I believe, Dick. And I believe that in about 3 or 4 hours, you're going to be able to go anywhere on the record of your life that you want to. And you'll be able to go there as many times as you want to. I don't know whether or not you'll be able to visit other people's records. I wouldn't be surprised if you could. But I firmly believe that you will become free of time. Because the answer to this girl's question, what happens to time when we sleep, he said, there is no time when we sleep. Time is a result of consciousness. You go to sleep at night, you wake up in the morning, those two things are basically glued together, and during that 8-hour period, there is no time. There's no time because your consciousness isn't, you're not having to filter it. You're still alive, your brain is still alive. Time passes for other people watching this, including the clock, which is also observing things and measuring things, but as far as you're concerned, time stops at 11 at night and starts again at 7 in the morning, or whatever the case may be. And you don't experience time because your consciousness is turned off. And that is what leads me to believe that when your consciousness is turned off permanently, time stops existing. And when time stops existing, then the needle can go wherever you want to. And in fact, you could play the record backwards if you want to. You just push that needle anywhere you want. I believe that, I've come to believe that the complexity of this universe is so high. And if you look at animations of DNA, if you look at animations of DNA replication and so on, and you can find them on YouTube, just look for DNA animations. What you'll find are these computer representations of molecules that are reaching over here, grabbing something, putting on a line here, walking a step, reaching over, grabbing it, putting on a line, walking a step. You'll see things that look like zippers where one strand of DNA is coming out this way and then another strand's coming out that way and it's bonding to other chemicals and stuff. But some of these animations, no joke, are of molecules that are walking. They're walking down this strand of DNA and they're reaching down and just riveting things. And it looks like a factory to me. Now, I'm perfectly willing to admit that this is possibly complete hooey. I'm perfectly willing to admit that guys like, Carl Sagan and what's his name? Selfish Gene guy. The world's leading atheists. I'm perfectly willing to admit that it's entirely possible that they're right, that this whole thing is just a story we tell ourselves, that life is random and an accident, and that we're accidents, and that there's no meaning, and that there's no purpose, and we'll never see anything again. It's just oblivion. That may Dawkins, thank you. That may be the fact. That may be entirely true. But even if it is true, I choose not to believe that, because whatever happens during this run, I'm much comforted by the idea that I'm going to see these people again. And just because it's comfortable doesn't mean it's wrong. It doesn't mean it's a fantasy, and it doesn't mean it's wishful thinking. If observation did not affect the universe, then this whole thing would be wishful thinking. But it's not. And if you really think about it, if observation changes the way the world is structured, basically, put it a little more sophisticatedly, but still very simplistically, quantum theory says that the universe is in a state of infinite possibilities. That's the idea of Schrodinger's cat. If it's got a 50-50 chance of being alive when you open the box, and the mechanism has a 50-50 chance of killing the cat, then the idea behind that is that the cat is neither dead nor alive until you open the box. When you observe the cat, it starts a cascade, a quantum cascade, and the way I put it is, when you make an observation of even of like an atomic particle, it no longer has the luxury of being in multiple probability states. Once you look at it, nature has to make a decision. It has to make a decision. It compresses this probability wave, and while it could have been anywhere, when you observe it, now it has to be someplace, and then this thing just kind of expands up. So I believe this, and that's got nothing even to say about simulation theory, but if it turns out that this thing is in fact a simulation, then you would want to save the files, right? I mean, you'd want to save the files. Now back to the little bird. Back in 2010, I want to say, I'd half owned an airplane with a person I was dating before I met my wife. And we would go flying quite a bit, and it had an engine up on the top of the wing with a cowling in there. And when we do the pre-flight inspection, you want to look up in there to see if any birds have built their nests and so on. We hadn't flown for a long time. It was at Santa Monica Airport. And sure enough, I look up there, and even from the outside, I can see that somebody's built a nest up there. So I very carefully reach up to this thing, and I lift this nest up and out, and I bring it down, and there's a, I don't know, 4 or 5 day old chick in there. This little baby finch. We decided to name him Howie after Howard Hughes because he was born on an airplane. So we put aside our plans for flying, and we went down to the pet shop, and we bought, like a heat lamp, and we bought parrot formula, and a little cage, and stuff like that. So we got some warm towels, and we kept a warm light on it. We got a syringe, and we got that parrot formula, and you would push it up against his beak, and he really was tough getting him to open. And then after like the second day, all of a sudden, the thing appears, this eyedropper appears. It just starts opening. So I fed that bird every hour for about 8 days. And his feathers came in, and his beak hardened up, and he turned into a really cute, fat little finch. And then I drove him out to a wildlife rescue place here in California, where they put him together with other finches so that he could learn how to speak Finch. And then they have this enormous enclosed outdoor, like a terrarium, where all of these birds are flying. I mean, it's huge, but it is outdoors. So then the birds spend some time out there, and they get used to the environment, and then they release them all at the same time, so they have some orphan birds to hang out with. And I was very, very impressed by the facility, and I've been making a donation to them ever since, every month. And they were taking the bird's temperature and all the rest of it. Aviary, thank you. And so I left Howie there. And on the way, after leaving him there and going out to my car, I, to my utter amazement, discovered I was just sobbing uncontrollably. I was just blown out, just gone. But the point of all this is, for people who say, well, afterlife and heaven and happily ever after, and even if there was a God, or if there's something more powerful, why would you think that you would get that? And I come back to Howie. I mean, we had plans to go flying that day, and I could have taken this nest and thrown it in the garbage. I could have taken Howie home, and I could have not fed him. I could have tortured him if I wanted to. I could have smashed him anytime I wanted to. His life was utterly in my hands. And I could have done anything I wanted to that bird, because I had godlike powers over that little chick. But I didn't do any of those things. I cared for that bird, and I took care of him, and then I went to a fair amount of trouble make sure that he had the best chance he possibly could, because I loved that bird, and it was the right thing to do. And I always use these examples of something less than us, like Flatland or Howie, because I can't imagine things bigger than us, but I can use the experience of looking down to kind of imagine what it would be like to be higher than me looking down at me. And I realized that, intelligence and kindness have a high correlation to a certain point. And then as you get more and more intelligent, I think you find that kindness actually drops off. But kindness and wisdom are a one-to-one correlation. And the more aware you are, the more thoughtful you are, the more you are willing to do things like go to trouble, like cancel your flying and feed this baby bird once an hour for 10 days. And then don't just hope for the best, take him to where he's got his best chance. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do that for this little bird, then hopefully I'm in the hands of somebody who is much more aware than I am, and presumably that much kinder. In other words, if it's within his or her or its power to save me, then it will, because that's the right thing to do. It's morally correct. It's what is it's what thinking creatures do. If they had the means to save, I had the means to save that bird, and I am extraordinarily imperfect person. But it wasn't up for discussion, and neither was it with my friend at the time, Dana. We didn't give it a second thought. I'm not going to throw that bird in the trash. And we could have, but we didn't. And so I think that there is a very, very, very sophisticated observer out there who's able to not only observe everything in our universe, but looks down on it from 5 or 6 dimensions above our universe, and is able to envision something so much greater than our universe that our universe essentially just spins off from it. But I do believe that everything that we've done or will do is and always will be there, that there was, this is time-based thinking, which is hardware limitation. I think all of our emotions and actions have always been there. They always will be there. They're baked into the universe's 4-dimensional structure and higher, and that I have a fairly solid amount of experimental evidence to prove that this is the case. So I could say with a lot of confidence that when we walked out of that room, he didn't want hugs or anything, and it's hard on his breathing, plus he's a steely-eyed missile man, so when we all left the room, we just decided to salute, so we all saluted him. And I was, I think, the last one out of the room, and I told him, I said, look, Dick, all my life I'd wanted to be a fighter pilot. I saw F-100s and thought they're the greatest planes ever, and not only, I didn't get to do that, but I did get to meet the greatest fighter pilot ever, and I did get to meet the guy who made the F-100 his, bitch, basically. And it's just been an incredible honor and pleasure knowing you. And he said, thank you very much. It means a lot to me. And he says, you do good work, Bill. And I said, well, thank you. I'll try. And I keep trying. And then as I was walking out the door, I said, so I guess I'll see you later, Dick. And he said, well, I'm not going to be here much longer. I said, yeah, I'm not talking about that. Pilots have an expression that you don't die, you fly west. So Dick flew west on Friday, and we'll all fly west someday. I do believe I'll see them. When I say see them again, I'm back to the time thing. I'm back to a before and after. I'll always see them. I always have seen them. I always will see them. The record has been pressed. The record, Dick Rutan is a track on my record, and I'm a track on his, and I believe that is essentially a physical structure that exists, And I believe that when the consciousness goes, we'll be able to move around on that record. In fact, I had the thought that for every one of us watching this and listening to this right now, we really have no way of knowing if this is the first time that we're the needle going down this particular pathway. Could be that we particularly like this song and this is the 700 billionth time that we've decided to play it. We don't know, but I feel like it's true. It's got the ring of truth to it. The structure of DNA and watching these molecules look like a factory. It looks. I can understand. I fully understand and fully believe in macroevolution. I understand that completely, but on an atomic level, on a protein level, and all that stuff, I'm perfectly willing to concede that this could be 1 in 3, 10 to the 300th power likelihood. And the argument for that is yes, well, that number had to have come up because otherwise we wouldn't be here to talk about it. Somebody has to win the lottery, right? Your chance of winning the lottery is so close to zero, it's zero, but somebody wins the lottery. So that's the argument that the materialists make, and it's got its merits, but it makes you wonder when the unlikelihood of so much, when the probabilities against this world, not just Earth, but just this universe, the probabilities against the laws of nature being what they are, if the weak nuclear force were just a little bit stronger or a little bit weaker, things would fall apart and all the rest of it. It's precisely tuned, and it didn't have to be. That's one thing that physicists can agree on, is that when the Big Bang happened, the laws of nature boiled out in a way that allows complex life to form. But if any of those forces had been different, just think if gravity had turned out to be 100 times stronger or 10 times stronger or 10 times weaker, it's starting to become so unlikely that you start asking yourself different questions. And then people say, well, if there is a God, then where did God come from? Well, he's always been there. Well, who wasn't always there? What was there before him? Nothing. You can walk that to the same materialistic question. So there's no God? No, there's just a Big Bang. So what happened at the Big Bang? Well, the Big Bang was an explosion. Well, explosion of what? Well, everything in the universe was in an infinitely small, infinitely hot, infinitely dense point. Okay? And then it exploded. And there's that then again. And for the first time I started asking questions like, well, what caused it to explode? Because if you're going to take the entire universe and condense it to an infinitely hot, infinitely dense, infinitely small mathematical point, something is holding that thing together. They don't have any answers for this. Their answers for the this is the point I just need to make. People think, well, you're not, you're denying science. I'm not denying science at all. These monkey brains have been unbelievable. I'm unbelievably proud to be human because of what our minds can do. Our minds can wind the universe back to within several billionths of a second after, poof, we can walk it back and our theories hold up, but we can't get to the bang itself and we can't get to the before the bang. And so if you're saying that something exploded, then if you want to play that game, like we can understand this, oh, it's simple. No, it's simple, Bill. I don't know why you're having such trouble with it. Everything in the universe is an infinitely small point, infinitely small, infinitely dense, infinitely hot. Okay. And then it just blew up and our universe just cooled out of it. Great. I get it. How did it get to be infinitely small, infinitely dense, and infinitely hot? What forces pushed it together? I don't hear the answer to that. Well, it was there before the Big Bang. It was just there before. Okay, well, we're talking about the same kind of dead end that people like Dawkins mock religious people for, Well, you have to have your God, and well, where did God come from? See, I've got you. Did God evolve? I've got you. Did your particle evolve? Who put your particle there? How do you explain? I can understand how something that's infinitely hot and infinitely small could explode in a big way. That's not a problem for me. My question is, how did it get to that state in the beginning to begin with? Well, it was always there. All right, Richard Dawkins, you and I are back on the same boat. We don't have the horsepower. We don't. Veronica says, God said, let there be light. This is looking to be more experimentally true every day. That the act of observing nature changes nature. And with a sufficiently sophisticated observer observing so many things at the same time, that observer could just simply have decided, let there be light. Well, where did the observer come from? What do you mean? Well, when did he appear? He's always been there. He always will be there. Well, it must have been something before him. No. You can't have before and after. You can't handle it. You can't handle it, you know. I can take a chimp and try to teach him fly an instrument approach, but it doesn't matter how many hours I put into it. He doesn't have the hardware. And we have hardware limitations. And of all of this stuff, I think that's the one thing that most worries me and I find most not only disturbing but also kind of shocking, is that these very, very, very smart people refuse to admit that there are things that are beyond their comprehension. They believe that everything is knowable. If I told you that the most advanced species on Earth was a chimpanzee, and that the chimpanzee had told me, through sign language, that it was capable of knowing everything, what would your response be? My response would be, well, no doubt it's possible that the chimp knows everything he needs to know about being a chimp, but the chimp isn't aware of the fact that there are neutrinos coming up through the Earth in the middle of the night. The chimp is not aware of the fact that there are these radio waves that are passing through us at any given time. Chimp isn't aware of background radiation. The chimp looks up and sees stars and thinks they're little sparks of light or little fires or whatever. The chimp doesn't have fire. So the chimp can be utterly convinced that the chimp knows everything about everything, but that doesn't make it so. And for us to say, well, we've got it all figured out because we've got this kind of brain, we've got so many cubic inches or centimeters of brain, and the chimp, we have 1,000 and the chimp has 450 or whatever. Okay, so you're saying that I'm saying that the chimp has limitations to what it can understand compared to humans. Yes, I think we all agree on this. So if we can agree that 450 cc's limits you here, and you can't get to all the things that you have at whatever, I forget what the human brain is, 1,200, let's just say for the sake of it. So if you're saying that humans with 1,200 cc's can understand this, and chimps with 450 cc's can't, are you saying that this 1,000 cc's or whatever is the theoretical limit? What if you had 7,000 cubic centimeters of brain? What would you be able to understand then? You would be able to understand more if you had 7,000 cubic centimeters than you would if you had 1,000, right? Because we've already admitted that chimps have 450 and cats have less, and dogs and fish, right? We can understand that. That's clearly true. So the brains get bigger and bigger and bigger, and the bigger the brain gets, the more you're able to understand. Are you saying that this is the limitation? This is it? Not that this is it on Earth. It is. This is it on Earth. But is this the theoretical limitation? And what about all the atheists who are working on artificial intelligence? Where do they go with that? You're trying to make something more intelligent than you are. Why? Well, because it will be able to figure out things that we can't figure out. Exactly. And that's something about AI I'd never thought about. But wouldn't that be kind of interesting if it turns out that you had an artificial intelligence that had 3,000, essentially the equivalent of 3,000 cc's of neural connections? Wouldn't it be interesting if the first thing that computer did when you turn it on would be if it started praying to God? That would be kind of an interesting an unexpected result, wouldn't it? Instead of it, deciding to launch all the nuclear missiles or solve the cancer problem, what if it just got smart enough to be able to see all this stuff and it just started praying? That's a bit of a unexpected outcome. And since nobody knows what's on the other side of that singularity, I maintain it's as likely as anything else. So it's been interesting. So I want to get back to this courage business and it being a learned skill. So my friend Dick died, and you can tell I'm not shattered by this news. And I'm not shattered by the news because I watched a couple things that made me happy, that made me feel at ease. I watched a guy who was hours away from basically taking himself off oxygen, and he was calm and relaxed and sharp and funny and brave. He said something that just froze the blood in my veins, however. When I got picked up the night before we saw him, the person who picked me up is one of the most remarkable men I've ever met in my life. He's an engineer named Brent Regan. He's worth 200 normal people. He's just the smartest guy in the world. If there's anything that's any kind of problem, he will simply go out there and build it, and it'll be perfect. It'll look like it was made by Vulcans 400 years from now and sent back in time. He's a problem solver. He's incredibly brilliant, and he's incredibly creative, and he's a great guy on top of it. And as we're driving from Spokane to Coeur d'Alene, he's telling me about the phone calls that he had made to see if there was a pathway out, and it turned out that there was. He said he'd run into a top transplant person, told him about Dick, and asked if there was any chance, and the guy said, well, yeah, I mean, we need to see his run-up, and Brent said, he's not disqualified by being an octogenarian. He said, no, not for a lung transplant. If it turns out, he said, there's really only one criteria that we're looking for. This is the transplant specialist secondhand coming to me through my friend Brent. And Brent said, what's that? He says, does he want to live? That's what we make our decision on. People who want to transplant is hard on the body. People who want to live usually survive, and the people who don't usually don't. And Brent said, well, I know he's a fighter, and I know he when he makes up his mind to do something like fly around the world unrefueled, he'll do it. So, yeah, I think you could convince him that he wants to live. So the plan was, well, send the information to him, to this transplant guy. They'll take a look at it, and then we'd have to get Dick down to San Francisco, and it looked likely that he could, certainly a decent chance that he might be approved for this lung transplant, and so here's a crack of daylight. When Brent told me this, I thought, I don't think he'll accept this, and I kind of hope he doesn't. But I didn't say that. He then told Dick's brother Bert, and Bert also felt like he shouldn't bring it up. But Brent had gone to an awful lot of trouble. I mean, he pulled a lot of strings and moved mountains to get this information, because Brent's a good man. He's just a good man. And we were sitting there, not Bert, Dick Rutan died. James, not Bert Rutan. Dick, his brother Dick, on Friday, the 3rd, I was there. So, no one said anything to Dick about this. Not a peep, not a word, none of it. There was some thought about broaching it with him later on, but somewhere when we got about halfway through the time we spent with him, he was sitting there in bed, and as sharp as a tack, and looking great. And Dick Rutan, who was just an hour or so away from unhooking his oxygen, said, you know what the cruelest thing you can do to somebody in this position that I'm in right now? I said, no, what? He said, offer him hope. And I went, whoa, whoa. And then it made perfect sense to me. It's like, this is a difficult place to get to, and it's a courageous thing to think about. And you get to the point when you've made your decision and you believe that you've got all the variables nailed down. In other words, this is as good as it's going to get. You're stuck on this 35 liters of oxygen per minute. Yes, you heard me, 35 liters per oxygen per minute. And these gasping attacks at night, this is what your life is going to look like. And the cruelest, and so you make a decision, and you get comfortable with that decision, and you believe it's the right decision, because it is the right decision. And then he said, the cruelest thing you can do is give somebody hope. And at that point, I thought, well, hell, do we have an obligation to tell him that they'd gone to all this trouble? But nobody said anything, and because we realized that Dick wouldn't have made it to San Francisco. He wouldn't have made it out of the hospital. His lungs were destroyed. And all that would have done is give him doubt. It would have suddenly made a decision that he had accepted. There'd be a new variable out there, namely, am I shutting down when there's a reasonable chance that I could continue to live? You don't make that decision to unhook yourself from your oxygen unless you're out of options. That's the eject button, you know? The plane is not flying, it's on fire, it's going into the ground, time to eject. Dick ejected 3 times, by the way, in his course of his life. 4 now. And so Brent didn't bring it up, because while there was a theoretical chance, the chance was so close to zero. In fact, it was zero. He wasn't going to survive a trip. He's on that much oxygen. You can't put him on an airplane. You can't take him up to an 8,000-foot cabin. You just can't do it. He's just not going to make it. His body is so weak and it's shutting down. You know, But when he said the worst thing you can do is give somebody hope, that really went through me like a hot knife going through butter, and I just thought, yeah, I completely get that. So like I said, I walked out of the room. He was in bed. I was the last one out of the room. I got a chance to see Bert say goodbye to his older brother. Dick had been in Bert's life for as long as Bert's been alive. And those two have been working together, and there's been tremendous rivalry between those two. He said goodbye to this guy who's been the companion in his life since he's been born. And I got to say goodbye to him too. And the last thing I remember was smiling at him, just turning around, looking back at him as I'm walking out the door, saying, I'll see you again. And that was great. Now, I neglected to tell something that I thought was really superb, and this was right when we first came in. After I'd made my introductory round of poking jokes, he said, so let me tell you what I want from you guys. I said, okay, and you say it, Killer, and you say it and we'll get it for you. He says, I don't want a memorial service. I don't want people dressed in black. I don't want flowers. I don't want a service. I don't want any of that stuff. I want a hangar filled with airplanes. I want a couple of steel drums that are just filled with ice water, in which is floating a ton of beer. I want hamburgers and hot dogs, and I don't want anybody wearing anything more formal than a t-shirt. That's what I want. Okay, that's what we'll do. And so I ended up getting put in charge of the memorial service, because as soon as he had actually died, when we got the word he died 3 hours after he'd gone off the oxygen, I I said, his wife texted us. We were downstairs in the cafeteria in the waiting area. But he was alone with his wife, and she finally texted us at 7:08 p.m. on Friday, May 3rd, 2024. And immediately, there was a group of 5 or 6 of us, all of us pilots, and we immediately started talking about, okay, we're all going to Oshkosh this year. We're all going to AirVenture. Dick was going to go with us. He's not going with us now, at least not in the same airplane we are, at least not visibly in the same airplane that we are. So we started talking about Oshkosh. And I started thinking, there's 40, 50,000 people there on any given day. Every single one of them knows who Dick Rutan is and what he did. And not only did he fly around the world in Voyager, but he had a Long Easy, flew his Long Easy around the world. He's Mr. Experimental Aviation. He's a legend. He's a legend. Not to mention all the combat stuff in Vietnam. He won the Distinguished Flying Cross twice, the Collier Trophy, the Silver Star, the Purple Heart, Air Medal. He's a legend. So we need to take a day at Oshkosh and make it about Dick, and we ought to tell the people at Oshkosh that this is what Dick wanted. And I said we need to have an open area, ideally where there's enough room for pretty much everybody. And then I think we need to make some phone calls to some breweries and see if somebody wants to sponsor Dick Rutan Day, because I think it'd be really, really cool if Dick Rutan bought everybody a beer or two at Oshkosh and beer and a hamburger. The Missing Man formation was discussed. There was a Missing Man formation with Long Easies. That's what Dick flew. He flew a Bearcoot with an incredible paint job. So Missing Man formation, and a couple years ago, somebody pointed out they'd done a Missing Man formation, and Dick had been the missing man. Well, of course he had. Of course he was. He's the guy who's going to do the hard work going into the loop. And I said, yeah, well, last time I was at Oshkosh, there was an F-100 there, and I think Dick Rutan needs to go out with more than Long Easies, which I love. I said, I think what we need to do is find the guy who's got the F-100. Dick spent his entire flying career essentially in the F-100. I think what we need to do is have the ceremony of the service, and right at the end of it, we need an F-100 come in as fast and as low as safe and possible, and then just go vertical with afterburners and just see that orange flame and that. That's how you send off Dick. When we got out of the room, I was so impressed by his courage, and when we were downstairs and we finally heard that he'd actually finally just died, I said to the guys gathered there, we need to go upstairs right now, and we need to take that bed, just keep him in the bed, lift the bed out of the hospital, walk it down to Lake Coeur d'Alene, put it on a raft, send it out in the middle of the lake, and set that thing on fire. This guy went out like a Viking, he went out like a Viking. And this is the point I keep kind of dancing around in terms of, what do you do when it's your turn? If I have the luxury that Dick had in terms of being aware that, this is going to happen and safe doesn't fall on my head or something like that. Not that that's a big worry of mine. I found out as I got older that safes falling on your head was not nearly the threat that I thought it would be when I was watching cartoons as a kid. But I genuinely believe that I'll be able to, that I will decide to go out the way that Dick did, that I'll be joking about things and happy about things, because ultimately the reason to do that is to make it easier on the people that stay. I started writing Eject, Eject, Eject because of the events at Arlington National Cemetery when my dad's ashes were interred. This was 3-4 months after he actually died. And the ceremony at Arlington made me feel so at ease and so happy for my dad. That it inspired me to write this essay called Honor, and that was why I'm here. So we'd asked what was going to happen with Dick. Was he going to be cremated or whatever? And it's like, the answer is yes. Is he going to be buried here in Coeur d'Alene? He's like, no. He's going to be buried in Arlington frickin' National Cemetery, where he belongs. And that event I will definitely be there for, because an Arlington military funeral, Arlington funeral, one of our strata loungers is in the Army, in the military honor guard. I think it's the Army, and he is a bugler, and he does these things, these ceremonial events, and I cannot tell you how comforting those ceremonies are, because it makes you feel like the person mattered, and I'm looking forward to Arlington again. I'm looking forward to walking behind that caisson again. I'm looking forward to the band and the march and the 21 gun salute and the folded flag and all the rest of it. That's like the bonus track at the end of the record for him. And I guess the point of all this is, if any of this is true or even close to true, Dick Rutan's life was a hit record. Every track on that album was pretty amazing. And many of us go through our lives where, when the record of our life is finally done, it's elevator music. We sat around and watched TV, and that's about it. And I would just urge anyone who got anything at all out of this little talk to remember that that you are you determine what goes into that pressing, and it's entirely possible that you will be able to come back and visit these times again. Again, there's that language thing. You will be able to visit them again. Risha says, I think my record is badly scratched. Well, that's got its charm too. And that even got me thinking about things like, if this whole thing is true, wouldn't I just want to go back and relive my favorite moments in my life again and again and again? And that's like saying, if I had an album and it was my only album, would I listen to my favorite songs first? Yes, but if it was the only music I could hear, I'd listen to every track. I'd go back and relive the bad stuff. I'd relive the good stuff. I'd listen to every track. I may be reliving this track right now. Who knows? So there's going to be three ceremonies. There's going to be a private ceremony, not private, but friends and family in early June in Coeur d'Alene. There'll be something at Oshkosh, which I think is where most people have their chance, and then there will be interment at Arlington, where he belongs. Where he belongs. He told me another Misty story, which was great. This is, an experience he had. He was one of the Misty pilots, the Misty missions in Vietnam. You'd call in airstrikes, artillery strikes. We had overwhelming firepower, and the enemy had concealment generally. And so when there would be contact, usually in the form of an ambush, it was very important to get either airstrikes or artillery or both on that position. That's how I'm getting to the super chats. I didn't forget them. That's how it worked in Vietnam. And they had observation planes that were really slow, like the Piper Cub in World War II. They were getting shot down. They came up with a plane called a Mohawk, which is a twin-engine observation plane, which was better, but it was still slow, and they were getting shot down. So finally, they decided to come up with this idea of the FASTFAC, Fast Forward Air Controller. And they had two-seat F-100s. And a typical sortie, typical mission in Vietnam might last, 90 minutes, maybe an hour, a little, maybe occasionally pushing 2 hours. You take off, you fly out, you bomb your target, you come back and land. But the Misty flights would be 6 hours or more. They would go over enemy anti-aircraft positions, over the battle space, and loiter there at 400 knots, and just above all the fire at 400 knots. And whenever there was anything that they needed spotted, they would just dive down and they'd go at the speed of heat. They'd just be 500-600 knots on the deck and below the guns that they could avoid. And go down there and put markers down or whatever the case may be, and coordinate these airstrikes and rescues and all the rest of it. Dick had told me when I talked to him for America's Forgotten Heroes that he's this is just so Dick, He said, we'd be on a mission and stuff, and you'd see a lot of ground fire, and he said, every now and then they'd open up on us. And my position was, anybody that opens fire on Dick Rutan's going to die. This is Dick talking about himself in the third person. I said, that may be the most Dick Rutan thing I ever heard. You want to elaborate on that? He said, yeah. If somebody opened up on our aircraft, we would continue our mission, but I wouldn't leave until we hosed the living hell out of that place. Teach him a lesson. And I'd heard that before. But when I was up there in the room with him, he was talking about being a backseater, because both the pilot and the observer were both pilots. They would swap around. It wasn't like there was a whole class of backseaters and pilots and GIBs, guys in back. They would just rotate. Dick said he was on this mission where he was in the back seat. He was doing the observing, and they took a bunch of fire from this tree line, this strip of tree line, and they were there for hours, coordinating the thing, and then they're getting ready to go, and the pilot up front put down smoke markers or something on it. He said his stretch was about 3/4 of a mile long on the tree line. From one point to another, marked them out, and they called in this the couple of F4s, and they just laid cluster bombs and napalm down this line where they were taking the ground fire from. And while the smoke is still in the air, the guy up in the front of the F-100 flew over that thing just under the speed of sound, and when it went over the smoke track, he did a roll, and as he was rolling, he shouted into his oxygen mask as loud as he could. He said, "Vengeance is mine, saith the Misty." And I thought, that's just, yeah, it is. So, that's kind of a brutal line of work, but that's what war is. And I think if you're going to be in there getting shot at and shooting at people, I think the only way to do this and maintain as much moral decency as you possibly can is to get it over with as quickly as you can, and that certainly was what his attitude was. So let me catch up with all these super chats, and we'll go to the questions, and we'll see what we got here. So that's my Dick Rutan story. I'm going to try and put up a post tomorrow on BillWhittle.com, and I'll link it on Facebook, where I'm going to put a link to the episode of America's Forgotten Heroes, which is available on Apple Podcasts. You don't have to be a member or anything, and it's an amazing story. It's just amazing. Lapco92 says, evening, Bill. Slipped in late. Any chance to watch 1, 2, 3 yet? No, I'm afraid not. I'll guilt you with my fact that I turned 53 today and had my hopes up. Sorry, Lapco. I was out of town, and I presume you caught up with at least some of that. I have it on my list of things to do, and I respect it too much to lie to you about it. So I will get to it as fast as I can, and I haven't forgotten it. It's right there on the desk, and it's in the stack. So thank you for that. And there's another super chat from Lapco. Says, if you want to look at someone's true character, watch how they treat animals. Always try to help animals when they need it if I'm able. Yeah. Yeah. That's what empathy is. You have to have a certain level of self-awareness to have empathy and kindness. something's in trouble, and you can imagine yourself being in trouble, and you want to, you would like to be rescued. So, if it's within your power to rescue or help, then you do it. So there you go. Here's our friend GK Masterson. Hey, Bill, I'm on my home time due to my truck's sleeper AC being out. Could you tell Natasha Christos Voskaris for me, which I imagine Christ is risen? Yes, because it's, I will, thank you. I believe it's Orthodox, Russian, Eastern Orthodox Easter coming up. They did all kinds of things a little differently than Eastern Orthodox. But I will pass it on, and thank you. That's very kind of you, and thank you for the super chat. GK Masterson again with a $50 super chat. My gosh, woman, you're truck driving. This is, this is hard work. I appreciate it. Okay, I'm beyond exhausted, going to sleep now. Y'all remind Bill to tell Natasha Christos Voskaresai for me, and so thank you, GK, if you're watching this in a recording. Thank you very much for that. That's very kind. Yeah, and talking about animals and kindness, Eric says Christy Nome showed her true character last week. Honestly, I don't understand. First of all, I personally think it was appalling. But what is the big mystery is how can somebody be as tone deaf as that to think that this is something that people would either respect or even, forgive. My understanding is that the dog was a year and a half old. Okay, so it's not doing what you want it to do. I can understand that, and I can understand frustration and all the rest of it. But just like every other person on the earth, if it turns out your dog's not working out with you, why don't you put the dog someplace where it has a chance to work out with somebody else? But even putting that fundamental thing aside, it's a career killer. It's over. You don't come back from that. There was a National Lampoon cover which was famous because it caused so much emotional distress, and it was a picture of a dog looking off to the side, and off to the side a guy had a .38 revolver up against the head of the dog, and the caption says, "Buy this magazine or we'll shoot this dog." And even just the thought of that was just so repugnant to people. So I can't imagine it. I'm a guy who's I give Bean 2 shots a day for 7 years now, and he's okay. He's okay. So I don't know how much time Bean has left on his track, and I don't know how much time I have left on my track, but I do know we're making the best of it, and that's all we can really do is make the best record we can. So that's my plan, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So let's see what we got here. Questions, why don't we? I was thinking earlier, it's like, oh man, I gotta hurry up and get set up because I've gotta set up both the streams so that we can, cut in live for the launch of the Boeing Starliner. And then I thought, oh, let's check. Scrubbed, a couple hours before the mission. I don't know how to express this other than to just come out and say it. I don't want anything to happen to those people, obviously, but I don't want that. I don't want that mission to succeed. I don't want it to succeed. You look at that thing on top of that rocket booster, it looks like it was made by a junior high school class. I don't want it to succeed, and I don't want Artemis to succeed, because when Artemis is, one flight every 3 years at $4 billion a pop, you really think about it, the genius of Artemis is they took the only part of the existing system that was reusable, namely the engines, and threw them away. That's the plan. I don't need to see them succeed. I don't want them to succeed. Because if they do, it's just going to keep that failure going. It's over. It's just plain played out. You are dinosaurs. You're bureaucrats. This is what I would expect the DMV to do. I hope. Needless to say, I want the crew to be fine, obviously, but I just don't want to see it. Roadrunner says, meanwhile, SpaceX is launching every few days. That's true, but sometimes SpaceX is launching 2-3 times a day. There's an animation out there that shows SpaceX's activity just as a running timeline from 2010 to 2023. And by the time you get to 23, they're doing the 1812 overture, because they're just going off above. That's just Kennedy. That's not Texas or Vandenberg, and it's like a Roman candle. What I want to see is if you look at the Starliner capsule, and it looks ridiculous. It's got a aerodynamic skirt, which makes it look like somebody just plunked it on a rocket that doesn't fit. You can see the bolts. It's almost like when we captured that MiG-25 and they didn't have flush rivets in it stuff, and it had tubes on the vacuum tubes on the inside. It's like, no, you will never catch them. What I want to see is some brand new company start up that says, we're going to do SpaceX better than SpaceX does it, and here's how we're going to do it. Because this dinosaur is, let me just say this and I'll put this to bed. Dave Big Booty, I saw this earlier before the show. He said NASA put 59 astronauts into space from Freedom 7. That was the first American manned flight with Alan Shepard, to Apollo 17. They put 59 astronauts into space. That'd be Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo in 11 years. They put 59 people into space in 11 years. SpaceX put 50 people in space in 4 years. And their tempo has increased to the point where they'll be putting 50 people into space in 1 year, very quickly. And all I'm saying is that SpaceX showed me that rocket launches don't have to be, oh, well, the next one will be, sometime next year, I guess. Nope, it'll be sometime later in the week, or maybe later today, for all you know. Okay, here we go. So let's find ourselves some questiones. Yeah, go out like a Viking, Make your friends proud to know you, and leave that behind, That you went out with courage and a sense of humor, and that it wasn't the worst thing that could ever happen. It wasn't even the worst thing that could ever happen to you. The worst thing that could have happened to you would have ended your stay here, whining in terror, and making life really difficult for the people who remain behind. I think the guy, well, I was always proud to know him, but I was never so proud to know him as I was walking out of that room, because that was a steely-eyed missile man, boys and girls. That's what that was, and is, and always will be. All right, here we go. I am back in touch with the web designer after 7 or 8 months, it seems, working on things. First thing we're working on is being able to get it turns out that we're not able to change our avatars on the site. I'm going to get all that stuff buffed up, and we'll do ourselves that big membership drive I've been promising forever. So slowly starting to get there. Here we go. Thank you, Marusha, for basically taking care of this this section for us tonight. Anyway, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Eric Blake, we got an Ian Nolan, we got a Way Rowers, we got another Eric Blake, we got a Jamie Waterman, we got a Marusha Dark, we got a Patrick Reed, Jacob Belchek. How about if we do one of each? How's that sound? I think that's doable. I think Eric's second question is, yeah, I'll take Eric's second question. Seems like it's a little more substantive. All right, so let's start with Ian Nolan. Bill, I was thinking about your pitch for the colonies, and this also ties to conservatives' current mindset, which tends to be focused on life's difficulties. Shouldn't it be a future of superabundance? Yes, it is and will be. The problem is not the material abundance, the problem is the spiritual poverty. Now, certainly the frontier will be relatively difficult compared to life on Earth, but they'll still have 3D printers capable of making any shape they want, although probably the luxury items will be anything not plasticky. This probably changes the idea of what instruments they have available quite a bit. For example, everyone can have a plastic guitar, but a real guitar is a luxury. Exactly. That's profoundly insightful of you, Ian. One of the plot points out in the future in season 2 or 3 or whatever, when I started realizing this music teacher thing, will be when somebody takes a serious amount of money, to have just a genuine wooden guitar flown, out there. And then it's going to, in a year or two after that, it's going to occur to somebody else that somebody's paying big money for genuine wooden guitars, so they're going to start growing their own wood or making their own guitars or something like that. Anyway, get the idea. Yeah, a plastic guitar is not the same thing. It's just not. And the same for violin and all the rest of it. So it's a great point, and I'm right with you on that, and have given it a little thought. But yes, this is the thing. There will be an abundance of mass-produced stuff, and what will be in demand will be handcrafted things and decorations. The necessities will be provided for, the luxuries will be the thing. And by luxuries, I don't necessarily mean caviar or anything. Luxuries like, how many times have you ever seen a science fiction show where you went into a room or a hangar or whatever, any residence, and seen art on the wall? Never. I can't recall any art on the wall in Blade Runner. I can't recall. The future is utilitarian, and they're trying to show it's the future. Hey, look, it's the future because there's no ornamentation. But humans aren't like that. We've been ornamenting things since we've been making things. So anyway, so Ian says, on to my actual topic. This is going to use a political event to ask a media question. It seems there's a societal shift going on from short-form video to long-form interviews, most recently with Tucker and Candace, but the same thing happened to Vivek during his campaign. A lot of the pundit class, including Shapiro, Klavan, and Green, seems geared to consume short news from many sources that have the time to spend on the longer interview that includes the nuance. Tucker's conversation was much more about the decision to develop the nukes than about the decision to bomb once we had them, as an example. How do we mix both breadth and depth? Well, I think we're pretty much doing it. The format is very fluid. That's one of the great things about what communication has become in the age of the internet. If we were talking about a talk show or something, if that was the only way I could communicate back in the 80s or 90s, let's say, was to get a talk show, then I would have, if it was an hour-long talk show, I'd have 52 minutes and 30 seconds every single week, and I'd have to make that show fit that to the frame, because you got to get the commercials cut in there and all the rest of it. So it's a genuine luxury for the first time that I'm aware of ever. Even book publishers have always had to hit some kind of word deadline. You make something as long or as short as you like, and people kind of find their own level in terms of what they like. There's a lot to be said for both of them, and I think the actual solution, I think the best possible solution, is to do both. I know for story mechanics, when I have these long interviews, the members will be able to see the point-to-point entire interview, including backstage instructions, whatever pickups or misses or whatever, all of it. That'll be a members-only benefit. Out of a hour and a half interview, I'm expecting to get at least 2 and maybe 3 different segments. Those will be edited down, cut down, and so people will be able to see the 7-8 minute version of that, or the 10-11 minute version of it. And then I also plan to do just soundbite cut downs of 30 seconds. So you should be able to kind of take your pick on, do you think this guy or girl is interesting enough to want to really get in the weeds with it. So any interview, and this applies to any other kind of video as well, the more depth you go into, obviously the longer it is, and the less impactful it is, unless you are already deeply or managed to be grabbed deeply by the topic. So airplane guys will talk airplanes until they're blue in the face. An airplane guy can tell an airplane story that anybody at a party would find interesting. An airplane guy is worth the salt anyway. But there's very few parties where you could do 8 hours of airplane talk and have everybody still stay riveted. So I think the audience finds its sweet spot, and a good content provider knows his audience. So I like to be able to think that I can cover both those bases and put out stuff that's short and impactful to everybody, and then for people who are more interested in the details, there's a longer version, and then for somebody who wants everything, including the backstage laughing and the how you been and that kind of thing, and all the outtakes and all the things that didn't make it into the actual edit, then that'll be available for members only, and hopefully that'll make everybody happy. We hope. Ray Juarez. Hello, Bill. Hello, Ray Juarez. A couple ideas for the colonies. Do tell. At the start of the series, you can have a wide shot showing most of the cabins with their lights on at night, and slowly pan to our family's cabin over the series after the music lessons get started. You can have paths start forming between the cabins and our family's ones, and then interconnect them as the community actually starts coming together more. Maybe lights get put up after a while. I see where you're going with this. I'll come back to that. The second idea was to have the reason that they cannot get a new part for the machine in episode 1 be that they do have a supplier, but that they will have to dig through months of red tape to get the new part. However, salvaging all parts is an area neglected by the government, so it's free and hassle-free. Love that too. Just some small details that would be nice to see for people who pay attention and hopefully aren't hard to implement. Have a good night, Ray. They're both great ideas. The business of repairing things rather than buying new things is one of the essential qualities of the frontier. So we earlier, just a few minutes ago, talked about superabundance with machines and so on. It's not a question of whether or not they're abundant. It's a question of getting them where they need to go. They're going to be on a remote colony, the Homesteader family. It's not one of the super popular colonies because it's very cold and then it very briefly gets very hot. But it's the family chooses their own level of isolation and discomfort. They could have gone to a more Earth-like colony, but there's lots and lots of people there. They could have gone to a single outpost on an asteroid someplace, but that was a little bit too in the weeds for them. So they just, through discussion, figured out how much social interaction they wanted, which goes back to your first point about connecting these hubs. I envision this first group of the people that are there when our family arrives are still very much pioneers. So I see them living no closer than 20 miles to each other. However, there has to be a social hub, and that social hub will be the small town that is essentially the landing site. This is where the supplies come in. And one of the fun things will be watching that grow. And one of the tragic things will be, I was thinking this would be towards, certainly in the later seasons of this, would be to see that our families put down got their rover in this one little spot. It's a real nice spot. It's a little cove or something. It's got a hill and a decent view. So they park their rover there, and then in the second season they've got a prefab house put down there. In the third season they've started to make some money, and they've got a bunch of different things that they're adding to the house, but the view is still there. And then somewhere in the fourth season somebody decides to move in within sight, and that's disturbing. And then by the time you get to the fifth season or somewhere in that neighborhood, there's 6 people within sight, and they start debating about whether or not it's time to move. People can be ornery like that. There is a critical mass. I mean, I personally love suburbs. I've been a suburbanite all my life, and I really like the. Hold on to that thought there, Don Vickery, about DCS. I personally like the population density of suburbs. There's enough people to go to clubs and movies and restaurants and things like that, but you're not constantly surrounded by people, and there's not so many people that there's the anonymity of crowds. That's the frost line. Once a town gets so big that you become anonymous, then you get urban pathologies like robbery and mugging and all the rest of that stuff. So I don't live in a town that's so small that I know everybody's name and face, but I also don't live in one so big that somebody can just disappear into the crowd. So we have enough room so that we have our own yards and our own house, and that we're renting, and at the same time we've got good neighbors who also mind their own business on both sides and across the street. And if somebody starts smashing a window over in that neighbor's house, the police are getting a call from me, and that's personally the way I like it. So it'll be a fun thing to play with. Is how many people can you stand to be around, and how many people does it take to really ruin a place? Because I think everybody can agree that they've seen places. Well, Coeur d'Alene is an example. It's my favorite place in the world. I believe I would have moved there quite a while ago, except I was fortunate enough to marry a woman from Siberia who understandably doesn't want to live any place cold anymore. And that makes sense to me, although I've lived in hot climates my whole life, so I just love it there. But there's a significant California invasion going on up there. They're managing to keep Coeur d'Alene more or less under control, but right next door, they're just putting up apartment complexes everywhere. And, everybody has their favorite little secret spot, and then it's not secret anymore. And that's a real tragedy, I've always thought, when a place that was kind of your place becomes really popular. But that's life. Right now in our neighborhood, we live in a house that was built in the 40s, so it's single level. It's got a big backyard. All of the houses in the neighborhood that I live in used to be that way, but in this gigantic, it's probably 6 blocks by 4 blocks. And as we walk around, and we've been there for 7 years now, and as we walk around, at any given time, there's 2 or 3 of these old 40s houses, single-story houses with backyards, are getting knocked down, and they're being replaced by these monstrosities with 3 stories that take up the entire property, because you are renting or selling by the square foot, and so they're building as many square feet into these lots as they possibly can. I personally find it very depressing, and Natasha's just constantly telling me, that's change, Billy, there's nothing you can do about it. And so no sense getting worked up about it. And she's right as usual, but I regret it, and I don't like seeing these enormous mini hotels with no yards, and just so much room on the inside. I don't know. That's just me, I guess. Eric Blake, hey Bill, last week your Right Angle episode on Simon Cowell, especially your opening story about your acting professor, reminded me of a sad fact I've long noticed about our side. Way back when a big Christian studio movie came out in theaters, and Christian viewers en masse went to see it and praised it to the hilt. Well, shortly after the film's release, a good solid Christian site dared to actually write a critical review, laying out correctly, I might add, how it just didn't work as a film unto itself, and the comment section was filled with people accusing the reviewer of opposing the spread of the gospel. Yes, I've seen this dynamic. Alas, I've noticed this trend with so many pre-chosen Christian studio movies or films otherwise made by conservatives. The movie's a mess, or the script is poorly written, or maybe the actors simply cannot act. But if you dare to call out any of it, you're branded a heretic or a secret lefty who's trying to sabotage our cultural progress. We're supposed to happily accept it, and as you see, the alternative to Hollywood. We're all obligated to accept that crap because it's our crap. So the question, Bill, is how long will it take for us to grow out of this? What will it take for us to accept some Simon Cowell honesty for ourselves? Well, you're absolutely right about that. I have used this term descriptively, but not derisively. When I see something that is pretty much what you described, I'll say, well, that's a church movie. I don't mean any insult against the church, and I'd rather have church movies than no movies. But when I say something's a church movie, it's something that was raised, money was raised in the church. That's good. The money doesn't care. But the production was done by church members. And to stretch the definition, an awful lot of fan fiction is church movies. We've talked about this many times, but Star Trek Continues by far the most magnificent piece of fan fiction I've ever seen. And that unbelievable effort was badly hurt, I thought, by the quality of acting in the series. I thought Vic was terrific. I just thought he was terrific. I thought the Spock character they had was pretty good. The first McCoy, who I think was in only one episode or one or two, was unwatchably bad. The second one was better, but not great. Grant from MythBusters was a great reality show guy, a tremendously attractive personality, but he's not an actor. The guy who played Chekhov was not a great actor, and this introduction of a counselor, was Vic's girlfriend. So it's hard to watch something that took that much effort and so much care went into it, and then see it, not ruined certainly, but mitigated perhaps by genuinely bad acting. But on the other hand, it's a labor of love, and if it means that you're putting people in there. Now, to be fair too, Star Trek Continues, while the acting wasn't, I wouldn't say consistent, at least they didn't have any 350-pounders walking the hallway in Starfleet uniforms. There are fan fiction out there where it's entirely produced by the fan, and so you get fans doing, because that's their payment, that's their payoff. I have to address this real quick. The comment section. Marusha says, I don't get why Bill is opposed to a counselor aboard a military vessel. Surely you'd want to maintain their mental health on long, deep space, isolated missions. To which I reply, yes, that might be useful, but they sure as hell don't belong on the bridge. They belong in HR. That's where she belongs. She belongs in the HR department. And HR departments are notorious. This idea that that you need a therapist at your left hand or your right hand while you're making command decisions is just plain ridiculous to me. I'm not saying there's no need for therapists, and certainly captains, especially, are lonely. They don't get to fraternize with anybody, but the idea that this person would, the fact that that the Next Generation Enterprise has 3 command seats is anathema to me. I get where they're going with it, but I just find it dumb. And I don't really see what the point of it is. I mean, of Next Generation characters, I think I probably like Riker the best. But what does Riker do? He sits there and watches Picard make decisions, and perhaps every now and then he's got some advice, or Picard will ask him for advice. But he's just kind of sitting there. On the original series, the first officer was also the science officer, and he had a job. So the fact that there's 3 seats there is telling me that there's what they're trying to convey is the virtue signaling of, well, we're not a patriarchy. It's not like we have somebody in command. They're trying to have it both ways. It's like we don't. It's not like he's the king or anything. He's the captain of the ship, but he has to listen to his trusted counselor, and he's got his right hand man there, and it's like, okay, but don't you see? They don't. She doesn't need to be there. I don't know if she needs to be on the ship. I suppose she does. I'm sure there are psychologists on aircraft carriers, so there's certainly a place for that, I guess. But it's not. It's not on the frickin' bridge, and my experience with I almost said warfare, but really more importantly combat. In other words, kinetic combat where things are moving fast. Somebody who's there for emotions is the last thing you want. This would be a case where Spock's advice would be extremely useful, and I cannot see Troy's advice being nearly as useful. Of course, Marisha says she was also psychic, though, and that probably had tactical and diplomatic usefulness. Yes, if you have somebody on the bridge who can read the mind of your enemies, then that person is an intelligence asset. But see, this is where again where I think it was just one of those storytelling dead ends. Either she can or she can't. If she can, there's no story, because there's no surprises. If she can tell you what's going to happen, then there's no drama. And if she can't, then she's useless. Now, Steve Whoops says she was empathetic, not psychic, and I've heard enough of the I'm getting a feeling of this and I'm getting a feeling of that. Well, honestly, Troy, seriously, just between you and me, if they're opening fire on us with photon torpedoes, I kind of sense anger myself. I just thought it was just weak, and I thought it was kind of pre-woke, to be honest with you. It's like, well, we can't have can't have some white man in command of this thing. It's like, well, okay, then pick a black man or a woman or something, but have a commander, for God's sake. I don't. Steve Whoops says the feels go to the wastebasket. I think it was all that. I think it was just feels. Steve Young says we have a chaplain, not a psych counselor on aircraft carriers. Great. Chaplain would be great. Of course, they couldn't have a chaplain on Star Trek because that would imply that they were all locked into the primitive, troglodyte mentality of religion and all the rest of that kind of thing. So I suspect that's what that was all about. I just think that they tried to have it both ways, and when I saw Star Trek Continues and I saw this counselor character who didn't do anything for me personally in terms of story or anything, and then you look her up and it turns out it's Vic's girlfriend, and it's like, well, now it makes sense to me. It certainly makes sense to me. I just think it's a mistake. And Eric's larger point, I think, is really the issue here. You have to have standards, and And if it turns out that the well is so dry that the only way you can get this thing done is by having friends do you favors, then you have to do friends favors. But nothing takes me out of a story. Even bad acting is secondary to people who are, stuffed into, they're 24 sardines stuffed into 20 sardine Starfleet uniform. And the one thing I think that I liked about the future is how fit people are. This is a real issue for me. I recently gained 10 or 15 pounds. I can't shake it. It's driving me insane. I absolutely hate it. So I've started a walking program, and we'll see how well that works. But there is a lot of stuff in our food that wasn't in our food when they were making the original series. Because if you look at them, let's not forget that William Shatner I've heard stories that he was in some danger of losing his job if he put on more weight than he did. So Shatner was heavy, and he was fighting his weight on the original series. But if you look at him at his heaviest, by today's standard, he's svelte. I saw something from like 2004 or something, where this woman came out and she was a plus model, and she looked trim by today's standards. So I think this is a major health issue that, and I don't think it's people suddenly lacking willpower. I think that this high fructose corn syrup is in everything, and it's very, very difficult to shake it. I think it's everywhere. So anyways, that's that. Janie Waterman. Hey, Janie's back. Howdy, sir. Awesome Klavan interview. Thank you very much. It's fun to see you guys together. It's fun to be together. And I'm glad he finally had a show that was worth watching. During said interview, you actually answered one of my Empire of Terror questions. Why did Germany finance Lenin? The shame for taking the Kaiser's gold. Why of Germany said it would be in their interest. What actually were these iron dice, and who was rolling them? The German High Command in World War II was, I think it was OKW, Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, but it was the nature of 20th century armies and 19th century armies as well, that the military would not just be one leader or general, but that there would be a sort of an inner cadre basically called the High Command. And this was an extremely elite group of people who all thought exactly the same way. So while during World War I, Kaiser Wilhelm was the titular head of the country, and constitutionally the head of the country, he was the Kaiser, but the war was run by the High Command. And in the beginning, that was von Moltke and I forget the guy who came in second, who was actually really, really pretty good for the Germans. But eventually, after their success on the Eastern Front, it became Hindenburg and Ludendorff. And so these guys and a couple of other field marshals and staff officers and so on were essentially the government of Germany during the war. And when they decided that there was a good chance to knock Russia out of the war and end Germany's perpetual two-front war vulnerability, they took it. So that was the rolling of the iron dice. And it was a real smart move. They had essentially nothing to lose. I mean, it's not like Lenin was of any use to them. Russia was an enemy, and even if Lenin had not gained power, just throwing that monkey wrench into the gears of Russia would have caused a lot of trouble, and it did prior to him taking power. So it was the smartest investment the Germans ever made, and the best investment in terms of the dollars that they spent. What they didn't expect or anticipate was that he would succeed to the degree that he would essentially poison the world for the rest of the 20th century, and And while it was Leninism, not Lenin, but Leninism that caused the purge of the Red Army prior to World War II, which is why the Germans had such unbelievable successes in the beginning of World War II, their invasion of Russia. Ultimately, he created a totalitarian system that was equal to the Nazis in terms of single-mindedness. And by planting communism in Russia in 1917, that sure came back to bite him hard in 1943, so and 44 and 45. There's that. Marusha Dark says Stefan Monio made the argument that if the U.S. hadn't gotten involved in the war, World War I would have led to a stalemate, and the Germans would never have had to send Lenin to Russia. And I'm sure the argument would have been made that then there wouldn't have been a Treaty of Versailles, and then there wouldn't have been a Hitler, and there wouldn't have been any of those things. And I don't know. I'm just old-fashioned about cause and effect. Anytime I see a fight, I just naturally want to say who started this. And the tragedy of World War I, where these gigantic wheels had to be spun up in order to fight this industrialized war. And even if you weren't planning on going to war, you still had to spin up and mobilize, because if you didn't, you'd be caught with your pants down and lose the war in 2 weeks. So everybody starts ramping up, and the thing took on a character all its own. But the actual belligerency, I think, largely and fairly belongs in the German camp there. So now a couple of other questions that are still questions. If you only want one question tonight, choose number 2. Why is Trotsky's timeline on the Empire of Terror cover art only from 1970 to 1918? Seemed like the series he was active for longer. I didn't do anything with the graphics or the thumbnails. I suspect it's because he became less important. Trotsky was, after Lenin, first of all, he missed Lenin's funeral, which was catastrophic. And then he simply read French novels while Stalin and Zinoviev and Kamenev were plotting to get rid of him because he was the obvious logical successor to Lenin, and Trotsky was above it all. He was such an intellectual, he didn't want to get his hands dirty with politics. So Stalin ended up banishing him and sending all of his records and books with him too. And so Trotsky spent the next 20 years roughly criticizing Stalin from afar until Stalin finally murdered him. So Trotsky does this slow decline out of there. So that may be the reason for that. And then number 2, I realized this week that another series I watch a million times is also Soviet history, Chernobyl on Max. Chernobyl may be the best thing I've ever seen on TV. It may be the best thing I've ever seen, period. It is unbelievably good. It's just unbelievably good. So I am. I just love that. The reason that the Soviets make interesting history is because they do tragic things. And not only did it poison Ukraine and the Soviet Union, it poisoned the world for nuclear power. Prior to Chernobyl, there was China syndrome, which the 3 Mile Island reactor didn't really have any long-lasting impact because we had a containment that was built like a fireplace. So if we're going to have a fire, we build a fireplace, and we build our fire in the fireplace. We don't put the fire out in the middle of the room. And the Russians, to save money, did not have a containment structure around their reactors. And even then, which, as you know from Chernobyl, the Soviet reactor was physically unstable. It could run away hot. Western reactors are designed so that if you lose control of the reaction, it runs cold. It fails safe. But even then, there would not have been Chernobyl if it had not been for that one particular engineer who wanted to impress the Communist Party by running the reactor at power levels that were lower than it was ever designed to run at. And it was just sheer politics and corruption and cronyism and all the rest of it. So it was the bureaucracy and the system that caused Chernobyl, and then the cover-up just came naturally to them. The other reactors at Chernobyl, I think, are still in operation. So even a design that bad can be run relatively safely if you don't have a system that gives you absolute power. I mean, if you look at the sequence of events in the first episode, all of the technicians on Chernobyl are saying, we've got to stop this, and this one guy who's in charge, who's tied to the power structure, saying, I'll give the orders here. And when you have a society that's run on terror, people become terrorized, and they won't speak up. They won't just say, we're not doing it. And so next thing you know, you've got this whole thing done. So moving on here. Wow, lovely stuff included. So you got Marusha, Patrick Reed, Jacob Belchuk, and that's it, I think. Let me just take a look at these two Marusha questions. I'll do the other one. Okay, thanks, Marusha. So let's do Patrick Reed. One of my favorite podcasts is that of the Lotus Eaters out of Britain. I've heard of them, but I've never listened to them. The other day they had a discussion between two of their in-house presenters about the Apollo project. One host was skeptical that the moon landings took place, the other skeptical that they would or could ever be faked. I reached out to them later on X and recommended they speak to you if they want to hear more from the not fake perspective. Would you consider going on Lotus Eaters and talking the Apollo program? I would be delighted. Be delighted. Lotus Eaters is Carl Benjamin's at Sargon of Akkad, and I have heard him. Outfit out of the UK. For context, this is a link to their Apollo conversation. It's 40 minutes long, so you won't be able to share it on the Stratosphere Studio. An easy way to get in touch with them would be to log on to X and reply to this thread, and here's the link for that too. I hope this will be a good opportunity to reach a different audience and help them understand what happened during the Apollo missions. I'm going to click that X link now, and okay. So there's a link for Lotus Eaters, History Bro, and King Bingo. I'll reply to Lotus Eaters. And the same thing goes for atomic bomb denial. I'm happy to get into that situation too, because Tucker and Candace and the rest of these people are saying it was, morally evil, and they just have no idea what they're talking about. They start the conversations with Japan was on its heels and trying to surrender. It's like, no, it was stiffening its resistance exponentially the closer we got. So, yeah. Okay, so great. Yeah, I will. I'll click on that link. Thank you very much for that, Patrick. I appreciate it. I'll do that tomorrow. Jacob Belchuk. Hail, Bill. Does power corrupt or reveal? That's a remarkable question. Certainly corrupts. But what it reveals, I think, is not. I think what power reveals is not that people are power-hungry lunatics. I think they become power-hungry lunatics. That's the danger of the power. The danger of power is not that evil people will get it. The danger, and historically, usually the consequences, bad consequences of immense power is not so much that evil people will get it, but the idea that good people can have absolute power or enormous power without it corrupting them. And I've never seen a case where that didn't happen. Marusha has a good quote here from Frank Herbert. It's not that power corrupts so much as it attracts the corruptible. That's an excellent point. You see, that power is something that's been discussed throughout my entire life, obviously. It's can't talk about human interactions without talking about power. Every society has power structures. Thank you very much for, oh my gosh, again. John Eden with a $99.99 super chat. John, thank you so much for that. Those things mean so much to me. Thank you. I'm very grateful. Very, very, very grateful. But in all my life, I've heard about power, and I've known some people who've gained power. And my friend Jeremy Boring is a powerful guy. He's got a lot of power. I have never had any desire for power. And there are consequences to that, you know. There's a lot of things I could be doing or could be doing faster if I'd had more power, and if I had more power, I would have had to have more desire for power. But it's never been something I've wanted, and it's not something I think about, and frankly, it's something I would very likely turn down. I think the need for people to tell other people what to do, and Jeremy's not in that category at all. I mean, Jeremy's accumulated power because he's on a mission to spread the message, and the reason we did Empire of Terror was because Jeremy has enough ambition to have built Daily Wire into what it is. So there's that. Everybody's different, and it does tend to blind you to your own foibles, which is why pride goeth before the fall, or a fall. I don't think the fall comes unless you have this kind of pride and power. The kind of people that seek power. Let's take Hillary Clinton as an example. That person is mentally deranged, and is, I think, by any rational definition, a very evil person. Her husband, the former president, always struck me as the kind of guy that was mostly interested in becoming president because it's a great way to pick up chicks. That seems to be his obsession, and the events of Epstein Island and the rest of it don't do anything to change my mind about that. It seems to be his absolute obsession, and to be perfectly honest with you, I would much rather have a guy who's taking control of the country so that he can impress chicks than somebody who takes control of the country because they want to re-engineer every single person in it. If you're going to be a power-hungry lunatic, much preferred if you would just keep the results to yourself. When you get into people like that, it's crazy. Marisha says Elon Musk has absolute power. I don't agree with that. Elon Musk has no power over me. No power over me. Elon Musk could make a very attractive offer to me, and knowing what I know about him so far, chance would be good I would probably take that offer because I think we're mostly aligned on things. But certainly Elon Musk could offer me a lot of money to do something that I wouldn't do, and if that was the case, then I wouldn't do it. I feel pretty confident that I can say that. I don't think there's a price at which I will sell up my principles. You got to live with myself. But even so, he has no coercive power over me. He's influence. Power has to come from, real power comes from the ability to coerce somebody, the ability to make somebody do what you have to do. And this is why that line about people who are, power is sought by people who are corruptible. My experience has been that people who are crazy for power want power because they want influence over people, but good people can gain influence over people without having to coerce them. It's the difference between a dictator and a leader. A dictator forces you to do things. A leader presents things in such a way that you want to. You want to follow this person. You believe in what they're doing, and they're competent, and they're honest, and they're visionary. This is, I think, those three adjectives pretty much apply to Elon Musk, and that's why he's as successful as he is. He attracts people who believe in his vision, and those people will work much harder than people who you have to beat into submission. So, Elon Musk is a remarkable guy. I'm not saying he's one of us, but he is, without question in my mind, the only one of that multi-billionaire class that is human. And the only reason I say that is because he has a demonstrably provable sense of humor, which I can't find in any of the others at all. Not a shred. Nothing funny, nothing ironic, nothing no self-deprecation. When you name your rescue barge, of course I still love you, and you put together a video of all of your failures, and put that out there for people to see, that is a level of a certain kind of humility that I just cannot see coming from Microsoft or Facebook or any of those other reptiles. So that's my opinion on that, Jacob, for what it's worth. And last question for the night from Marusha Dark here. Topic, 4D toys. Since you brought up higher dimensions, I thought you might be interested in sharing this with the rest of the class. Someone programmed 4D toys into a game engine that you can actually play with, and here's a video. Let me have a look here. Oh. That's bizarre. So they're basically just simple geometric shapes, and when you move them, they do things, unexpected things. They'll roll over, and there will be a side missing, a face missing, and so on. I'm looking forward to looking at that. It's called. It's got 5.3 million views too. 4D toys, a box of four-dimensional toys, and how objects bounce and roll in 4D. So thank you for that. That's very cool. I love that kind of stuff. I'll take a look at that as soon as the show's over here. Personally, I don't see why there can't be an infinite number of spatial dimensions, and that might even explain what dark matter or energy is. I've come to believe that dark matter and dark energy are theoretical band-aids put on the fact that the universe is not expanding at a rate that's consistent with redshifts, and so something else had to be there. But very recent discoveries within the last couple months from James Webb Space Telescope, hang on there, Don, seem to indicate that light behaved differently at the beginning of the universe, and the universe not as symmetrical as we thought, which means that the universe might be twice as old as we thought it might be 26 billion years old, in which case you don't need dark energy or dark matter. And that has the ring of truth to me for reasons of elegance. The universe is elegant, and not just elegant to look at, but E equals mc squared is mathematical beauty. It's gorgeous. Maxwell's equations are very simple. These relationships could have required 25 blackboards worth of equations, but E equals mc squared, you're onto something. There's an elegance and a simplicity to nature. And so when you have to cook up band-aids to explain things that we can't see, dark matter and dark energy, we just need them to make our model work. They have to be there for our model to work. When I hear that, I think you've got the wrong model. Your model is incomplete. And the idea that the speed of light might have changed over time was so far outside the box that I don't think anybody really thought about it. The consistency of the measurements was so strong that the idea that that light may have been fooling around with us, I don't think anybody ever thought about. But if it is true, it does solve that problem very elegantly by simply meaning we don't need it anymore. Goodbye. That's got the ring of truth to it, to me. Personally, I don't see why there can't be an infinite number of spatial dimensions that might even explain what dark matter, dark energy is. A multiverse of infinite worlds extending in parallel like sheets of paper, flat land stacks on top of each other. Might also explain a lot of occult phenomenon. For instance, I was listening to Brett Weinstein talking about something called the third man phenomenon from an evolutionary perspective. Here's another link, which I'm looking forward to reading. Personally, I think time is an illusion created by the motion through a higher spatial dimension. That's exactly what it is. We're moving through the fourth dimension at a linear rate of 1 second per second. And we're not just moving smoothly. We're not moving in an analog motion. We are moving digitally. There is something called Planck time, which is, if I got the term correct, that when you get down to the very, 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 very short periods of time, you cannot divide it forever. That there comes a point when time moves in quanta. It's this time, and then it's this time, and there's nothing in between those two. That the universe is essentially has got a certain number of frames per second, and that's bloody interesting too, really interesting. Yeah, Marisha says Planck time is the frame rate of the universe. Well, why does the universe have a frame rate? You would think that, I mean, if time is a spatial dimension that we can't see, then what it's saying is ultimately we're making jumps along that line. Why? Marisha Dark says because it's a simulation. That's a damn good answer. That's a damn good answer. Computers have cycles and refresh rates. That's a damn good answer, Marisha. That's something I had not thought about before, but that's a compelling answer. It's the smallest unit of resolution in the simulation. Yeah, you would think that time would be linear. That, for instance, if I move my hand, well, I just answered my own question. This motion through three-dimensional space is smooth motion. It's not digital, but it's not smooth motion because it is a series of frames that are each one of them Planck time. So I hadn't thought about that before, but that is compelling evidence for the idea of a simulation. Because I can't think of any reason why reality would move in a quantized state like that. But I only peer into this cave. I don't claim to live in it. So there you go. You and I know this is from how animation works. We live in an illusion of motion created through a higher dimension. We only ever exist in one frame at a time. Yes, exactly. Kaladin says, sorry, simulation is a lame way to describe our universe. It is. It's certainly inadequate, but it's another one of those cases where it's all we have, Kaladin. The map of Texas isn't Texas. But again, if I were to if I were to start a show and say, what is this? And I had a map of Texas, everybody would say Texas. So in that sense, to call it a simulation is to grossly oversimplify the case, but you're at least getting to the heart of it. I think at least you're getting to the what you're trying to get to anyway. All right, so I think that'll do it. Hey, how about that? 2 hours and 38 minutes. That ought to cover us, I think. So got through at least one of every one of the questions, which is good, and it was really, really good seeing my friend off in such a grand fashion. I don't know whether I'll see him again someday. I don't even know if again and someday are real, but to the degree that we have to live with these concepts, then I hope to see him again someday, and I hope to see all of you again someday, like maybe Thursday would be good. So that'll do it for this edition of the Stratosphere Studio, made possible by the members at BillWhittle.com who have stood with us through thick and thin, and to whom we are really grateful. I'm speaking for Stephen Scott and Shelley, and you know, this is something we talk about every day. Oh, DCS, sorry. I've been waiting for Phil to get back home because the guy I've been doing the DCS with. So it looks like it's DCS go time. I've got emails from people about DCS that I haven't even read yet, but I think we'll start working on that this week. I'll start replying to some of these emails, and conceivably we could start even this week. So I'm going to be in early tomorrow, and I will. I'll start taking a look at some of that, and we'll just start out real simple. We'll just start out real simple. By the way, when I say real simple, so DCS is a flight simulator, and I think the first thing we're going to start with is taxiing. Taxiing, yeah, precision in taxiing is important, and I don't see it anywhere. I had a flight instructor, not in gliders, because we didn't taxi in gliders on account of the fact that there's no engine to taxi on. But when I started my power training in a Katana, which I loved, a light little airplane, but a really cool airplane, I would consistently taxi to the right of the center line. And he said to me, his name was Kaz, he was a Japanese guy, and Kaz said, it's just as easy to taxi on the center line as it is to just taxi 1 foot to the right of the center line. I thought that's actually a pretty good point, so I made it a point to paint the center line with the nose wheel. And then he said, and it's more than that, Bill. People in the tower will look at that, and they can tell from if you're right on that line, they know that you are that you got your Shinola tightly wrapped. So yeah, so it'd be fun. I'm going to talk to my friend about coming on. I don't know whether I don't think he'd really like the complexity of DCS. He might. My friend Steve, but he was an air traffic controller for many years, and I know he'd really get a kick out of doing all the air traffic control work, which really brings an awful lot of fun stuff to it. So we'll just we'll get this thing on the road here, and we'll start rolling. So DCS time it is, and I can talk about DCS without feeling incredibly guilty because I'd be taking time away from writing the Frank Luke thing. So there's that. Okay, so that'll do it, and I'd expect to hear back. So get back to all of you fine people about DCS, and this is open to anybody who wants to have who's got a decent computer, rudder, throttle, stick, and head tracking, like Track IR or something. If you don't know anything about flying, we'll take you from the ground up, if you'll pardon the expression, because that's what we steely-eyed missile men do. Okay, thanks again for everybody and for all you've done here for me and for everything else. So we'll say goodnight to YouTube, and so YouTube, good night YouTube.